I want to move now to Zelensky. So recently, I want to talk about specifically his quest for NATO membership, because he recently made comments while attending the NATO summit at The Hague, declaring that, quote, the direction is not changing, end quote, in regards to his quest for NATO membership. And this is something that you covered here on antiwar.com as well. I think this is a couple days ago. So Zelensky is still, as it mentions here, forcefully pushing for NATO membership. Trump has kind of squashed that on his side, right? Like, what's going on? What's the temperature between these two right now?
Well, one thing when Trump first came into office, Pete Hegseth, one of his first kind of addresses to the media was about Ukraine and Russia, and he said, no NATO membership for Ukraine. We've even seen Marco Rubio say that, and Mike Waltz when he was still the National Security Council. Trump said they can forget about it. So I think it's been pretty clear that it is off the table with this administration. But unfortunately, the proxy war, is still going.
Yeah.
But I thought it was really something. So the thing I just wrote before we started recording, so the big NATO summit was, the main day of the NATO summit was today in The Hague. And if you remember the last 2 years, there was a huge deal about the language in the communique, or the declaration, they call it now, that the alliance releases at the summit. And it was a big deal. What were they going to say regarding Ukraine's future membership into NATO? And it was pretty vague language both times, but they made a point to mention that they're going to bring Ukraine into NATO at some point. And Zelensky actually got very upset in 2023 because the guarantee wasn't strong enough, and he fired off a few angry tweets about it. But it was just a huge part of what was happening. And then I was just reading the communique, or the declaration today, and it didn't even mention Ukrainian NATO membership. And Zelensky didn't seem to say anything about it. So I think it does go to show that the dream, he might be coming down a bit now, that the dream of NATO membership really is off the table. At the same time, we saw all the European countries say that they're going to bring military spending up to 5% of their GDP. Some countries are fighting it, like Spain and everything. But this is part of Trump's big push. It's not at this point, he's not pushing to end the war or anything. Right. He wants the Europeans to spend more on it. And I think it's really dangerous what's happening, because you see the rhetoric from Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, but all these European leaders, that they're preparing for a war with Russia in the future. And I think it's really just insane and kind of scary, their attitude, even though it's become so clear that Ukraine has no chance of winning.
Right.
And they could end the war. They just got, Ukraine's going to have to make some concessions to Russia. But instead they're no, we're just going to keep it going. And we're actually now getting ready for a war with Russia. And of course their whole narrative is that, Russia, in a few years, I think they say they're going to be ready for war with NATO. They're acting like Russia's preparing for a direct war with NATO. So then they're preparing for war with Russia. And when those things happen, things become inevitable. So it's, I just don't like the direction things are headed here.
No. And this is another thing that really has kind of fallen to the back burner of mainstream coverage. I mean, and I get why. I mean, I think that Israel-Iran has obviously taken a very necessary front seat to everybody's attention, because that was really scary there and it is still scary, but it was very scary there for a second. But this has definitely taken a backseat on coverage. And I think that it's insane to think about. I mean, this is Donald Trump, Dave, he was going to end the war in 24 hours. You know what I mean? He was going to end the war in 24 hours. And now we have him, kind of egging on European countries to spend more money. He's really, we don't know to what extent he's working behind the scenes, if at all. I don't think he is at all. I don't think really he's doing anything. I think people are doing things behind the scenes. I don't think Trump has much to do with any of it. But it is, like you mentioned, the attitude behind it and the rhetoric is incredibly terrifying. And it's also frustrating because we've already seen basically an entire generation of Ukrainian men sacrificed on the altar of Western imperialism. And they can't win this. We all know that. And frankly, anybody who was paying any bit of attention knew that from day one. And here we are, whatever it is, 3 years later, 2 years, 3 years later. And
3 years,
this
yeah.
is, yeah, it's still raging on. And it's insane to me, um the attitudes and like the very cavalier. It's like they're not even really cognizant of the human lives being sacrificed. And I think that that's readily apparent across all of these things. These are people in positions of power. They don't care. You're just cattle to them. They don't mind sending your sons and daughters off to die for, their pocketbook, essentially. But where does Russia Ukraine stand right now? I know that there's been some airstrikes and things like that. What is the situation between Russia and Ukraine right now?
Yeah, well, one thing I'll say with Trump that is an improvement over Biden is the fact that he actually is talking to Putin and that the
Yeah.
US and Russia are talking, which I think does really bring down the chance of this escalating into like a NATO Russia war. I mean, it was really insane that Biden, after the invasion, just cut off all contact with the Russians, basically. I mean, and he even said that the world was closer to nuclear Armageddon than ever before and didn't even want to get on the phone. So that is the improvement, I think. And but when it comes to the actual war, it's like it's worse than ever. It seems like when it comes to actual fighting on the ground. I mean, very heavy fighting across the whole front line. We've seen heavy Russian strikes, missile and drone attacks across Ukraine continue, and Ukraine has been firing sometimes hundreds of drones into Russia. There was a lot of big drone attacks, and even according to the Russian military, there was potentially an attempt to kill Putin when he was visiting Kursk. And then after that, we saw Russia like really increase the bombing of Ukraine. And that's when Trump started tweeting or truthing, whatever you call it, at Putin, telling him to stop. But, the fact is Russia has its conditions to end the war, and they're ready to, they're settled in. They're ready to just keep this war going. And Zelensky is clinging on to power, and he knows that if he does give up that territory that Russia wants, then he's done. I mean, I think he has a nice villa in Miami or something, though, he could go retire at. But, like, this will be his legacy, being the guy that,
destroyed his country.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and because he bought all this nonsense from a brain-dead Joe Biden, and, like, he wanted to be part of the club in Brussels, and yeah, so he's got every incentive to keep this going, even if his people are being killed every day.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a common thing that we see, a common it's a kind of sunk cost fallacy, right? Like, you get into it because you want certain things are promised to you, and then once you're in it, how the hell do you get out without looking like a complete and utter buffoon? And I mean, there's a real I mean, let's be very clear. He's in real danger. I mean, you're in real danger, my guy. You're messing with the big leagues now. And I mean, you're expendable. And I think that he probably recognizes that. And it's a little bit of like a self-preservation also. So yeah, I mean, it's just watching the whole Russia-Ukraine thing, and the fact that it's going on now for over 3 years is insane to me. But you're right. Ukraine certainly cannot win this war. And watching it continue to play out, and watching the people of Ukraine get used, and I mean, Russia too, I think to probably a lesser extent, but I think watching them be used as cannon fodder, it's something that really makes my blood boil. So again, another story that has kind of been put to the back burner for other things, but something I wanted to bring up and get a little bit, and also just the NATO stuff. I think that that's something that I don't think anybody ever really thought that they were going to get NATO membership. I think that was kind of a carrot on a stick that was dangled in front of them to encourage the people of Ukraine to support the proxy war. I'm not sure that it was ever a reality for them. And that also really pisses me off, but that's neither here nor there. So
from Zelensky, I always remember this thing that he said in this interview with CNN in March 2022, right after the invasion. I forget who was interviewing him, but they asked, what has the U.S. told you, about NATO membership? And he said, well, they told me privately it's off the table, not going to happen, but publicly they're going to keep the door open. And this is, again, March 2022. So just basically they used it to, dangle in front of Ukraine to provoke Russia into this war. And the whole thing is just such a tragedy.
It really is. And that's what pisses me off, the way that they use that kind of stuff to not only kind of poke at Russia, but then also to encourage the manufacturing of consent amongst the Ukrainian population, civilian population, in order to support the war, because they got to do both. And that's what pisses me off. And that's, I mean, it's just one of the very many ways that propaganda is used to start and maintain wars. And it just really makes me angry.
Please clap.